Hey, it's Jeremy Faust, editor-in-chief of MedPage Today. We're back with more analysis of The Pitt Season 2. Let's get into it. Season 2, Episode 3. So let's dive right in.
I'm sure you have some questions. I know it's a lot to take in.
It's a tumor.
So this guy came in with a headache and he was also acting crazy. And I think that's what's really interesting is that the altered mental status, the fact that he was so erratic, ends up not being psychiatric, but ends up being a brain tumor. And this is something that we see.
It's a brain tumor.
Well, it's a mass. About 4 centimeters in the frontal lobe.
Is it cancer?
We can't say for sure right now. It could be many things. Infection, inflammation, a benign cyst.
All right, so here it's really interesting. When we see a mass on imaging, of course, everyone's mind goes to cancer. And a lot of times that's correct. But there are benign masses, that is a mass that's not actually cancer, but it's gotten big enough that it is actually causing symptoms such as loss of balance or changes in mental status. So you can actually have a benign tumor that's causing symptoms that could cause real problems. I do think there's a little bit of hemming and hawing here, this idea, oh, it could be an infection. That would not be great news.
Is it what made me fall?
Yeah, possibly. We'd like to keep you here and treat with dexamethasone, which is a steroid to take down the swelling. And then we'll need a brain biopsy to know exactly what it is.
You're gonna cut open my head.
It's just a small hole. We'll do a CT-guided stereotactical biopsy with a blunt, thin needle, which sounds crazy, but it's actually pretty amazing. I mean, most patients go home the next day.
All right, so I must say that this is sort of your worst case scenario for a headache coming into the ER, or one of the worst cases that is actually something serious. There are really two kinds of headaches as far as an ER doc is concerned. Headaches that need to be treated for symptoms but are otherwise benign. That could be a migraine, that could be another kind of headache. Or there are headaches that are indicative of a serious process, such as a mass, a tumor, but also carbon monoxide poisoning. There are a lot of things that we worry about. And I think that almost every time we have a patient with a new headache, you have to say the word tumor. So if we do a CAT scan for someone who had this gentleman's presentation, if that CAT scan was perfectly normal, I always say, by the way, we checked, we don't see any tumors. Because anyone coming into the ER with a new headache that they've never experienced, good chance they're thinking, oh my gosh, I have a brain tumor. So you have to address that. Okay, let's go to the next one.
You mentioned that you dropped the samovar when you heard firecrackers.
So this patient had a burn dropping a hot tea, I guess, on herself after hearing fireworks. This takes place on the 4th of July.
Yeah. I was on my way inside, October 27, 2018, to the synagogue when the shooting started. There's nothing I could do. I went in after the police arrived. I felt I had to. I'm better now. But New Year's Eve, 4th of July, when kids have their fireworks and firecrackers,
So first of all, I just want to say I appreciate this. I think the community appreciates this. The idea that here we are in Pittsburgh and we have a reference to the synagogue shooting from 2018. And I just think that's part of the community that should be acknowledged and it's appreciated. What I think is interesting medically here is that when we have mass casualty incidents, the shadow of that is not brief. You have the immediate loss, you have the deaths, you have the people who were witnesses, you have the PTSD there. But here we have someone who 7, 8 years later just burned herself because she heard loud noises on 4th of July, firecrackers, fireworks, that essentially, through a post-traumatic stress disorder kind of mechanism, brought her back to that moment where she heard gunfire that was tragic murder occurring in her presence. And I just think that we as a society need to think about the tremendously long shadow that these events cast and how they lead to problems down the road that we might not always anticipate. So I thought that this was an important thing to point out. Such an important part of violence prevention is not just the immediate loss of life, but also those surrounding that loss.
There is no clock on how long it takes.
No clock. You must be joking.
So the last clip I want to touch on from this episode is a traumatic death, a death by trauma. And let's look at it and discuss why it is that they manage it the way that they do.
Open skull fracture, tubed in for agonal respirations. BP60 palp initially started a liter of NS, but lost his pulse en route.
Oh boy, this doesn't look good.
1, 2, 3. Joey, check his pupils. Somebody hand me a pair of scissors.
8 millimeters, non-reactive.
Okay, so one of the most important things to know when you have a patient who is getting CPR or has any traumatic brain injury like that is the pupils. How big are the pupils? And in this case, she's saying they are large and they are not reacting to light. That is an extraordinarily bad sign, a very poor prognostic indicator. It basically is highly likely that this person will never have any neurologic recovery. They are probably already brain dead.
AKA blown pupils fixed and dilated. Oh,
Gosh, skull with tons of gray matter extravasation. At least it was quick.
Okay, so they just showed brain coming out of the skull. This is hopeless.
No helmet?
Nope, because he took the PennDOT motorcycle safety course.
Isn't that what you took, Robbie?
Full compressions, yes, but I still wear a helmet.
Oh, well, first of all, I think as fans of the show, we all know that that's not true. We saw in the first episode, he came into the ER not wearing a helmet on his motorcycle. And I think that that is a great example of how who we are in the ER as doctors may not always be who we are outside. And that's just life.
Is he a donor?
Also, nope.
That is too bad. Hey, Cicely, I think we are done here.
So a couple of comments there. The fact that he's not a donor is quite tragic. When you think about who would be a good candidate for organ donation, meaning you could save many, many lives and help many, many people.
What's next door?
The guy who hit him. Joy, you're with me.
Oh, another thing I want to say is that there's no code here. A lot of traumatic deaths, you do a longer code, you might open the chest, as we've seen in the show earlier. This one, they call it right away. There's no real prolonged resuscitative effort in the ED. And the reason for that is simply the fact that you literally saw the brain coming out of the head. There's no recovering from that kind of injury. And in fact, this might have been a case where EMS could have made what's known as a field call. And what that means is that someone loses pulses, they're dead, but for CPR. And of course, they receive CPR by first responders and they get transported to a hospital, to an ER. And in this case, though, the EMS teams, the ambulance team, could have said, hey, let's call this on the field. Let's not transport this. And there are various criteria for when a field call is permitted. And in many jurisdictions, exposed brain matter in a head trauma is indicative of a situation in which a field call would be appropriate. It depends on the case. It depends on the jurisdiction. There are different rules. But that is why, in this situation, Dr. Robbie basically calls it very quickly.
What about a moment of reflection? I thought.
He'll still be dead when we get back.
Yep. So here we are with this idea that in the past on the show, we've seen Dr. Robbie lead moments of silence, which I think is so important when someone passes away in the ED. But as is everything in emergency medicine and in the show, nuance matters. They can do that once they have dealt with the other acute emergencies going on. So I thought this was a very appropriate rendering of this kind of situation. So those are my thoughts from a few scenes in episode 3 of The Pit. We'll be back next time with more analysis on this great show.